Ready to dive deep into some fascinating science? Today we're going to be dissecting a research article titled The Paradox of HIV, Blood-Brain Barrier Penetrance, and Antiretroviral Drug Delivery Deficiencies.
That's quite a mouthful.
It is, but stick with us because this paradox is mind-blowing. Basically, HIV can get into the brain, but the drugs we use to fight it, well, they get stuck outside.
It's like HIV has this VIP pass to the brain, waltzing right in, while the medications are stuck in the general admission line.
And that VIP area, that's the blood-brain barrier, right? That super selective filter that protects our brain.
Right, it's like this incredibly secure fortress with a very strict bouncer, only letting in the essentials and keeping out anything potentially harmful.
So how on earth does HIV manage to bypass this fortress? It's not exactly known for being subtle, right?
Well, HIV's got a few sneaky tricks. One way it gets across is by hitching a ride on immune cells.
Immune cells, like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Exactly. Like those Trojan horses from Greek mythology. HIV hitches a ride on immune cells like T cells and monocytes.
And those cells are allowed to cross the blood-brain barrier, so HIV basically sneaks in disguised.
A very effective strategy, unfortunately.
But I read there might be another way HIV gets in, something about going directly through the barrier itself.
There's some research suggesting that HIV might be able to directly interact with the blood-brain barrier.
Like picking the lock to get in.
In a way, yes. It might be able to target specific receptors on those endothelial cells, the cells that make up the barrier. But it's still a bit of a mystery how it all works.
And to make matters even worse, HIV doesn't just sneak in.
It weakens the defenses from the inside.
It damages the blood-brain barrier over time, making it even more vulnerable.
Exactly. It triggers inflammation and can cause damage. This can lead to all sorts of problems down the line.
So HIV's in, it's weakened the defenses. What happens next?
Well, it doesn't just float around causing chaos. It establishes what we call viral reservoirs.
Viral reservoirs, so it's like setting up hidden camps.
Yeah, think of them as hidden bunkers. HIV hides out in these reservoirs, making it invisible to the immune system and even to our standard treatments.
Wait, so even with treatment, HIV can still be hiding out in the brain?
That's the problem.
Right.
It's one of the reasons why achieving a complete cure for HIV is so difficult.
And what types of cells are we talking about here? Where are these viral reservoirs hiding?
Primarily, HIV hides out in microglia. Those are the brain's resident immune cells. And the scary part is, research suggests that these reservoirs could potentially persist for up to 73 years.
73 years. That's longer than many people even live with HIV today. It really puts the challenge of a cure into perspective. Okay, so we've got HIV getting in, weakening defenses, and setting up these long-lasting hidden camps. That doesn't sound good for treatment, does it?
It means that even when antiretroviral therapy, or ART, is working well to control HIV in the blood, it might not be reaching those reservoirs in the brain.
So even when the medications are doing their job elsewhere in the body, the brain is like a separate battleground.
It is. And that's the crux of the paradox we're talking about.
So those medications, the cavalry coming to the rescue, they're only securing the outer perimeter. Meanwhile, the enemy's already established a base camp deep inside.
A very good analogy. Most RT drugs simply aren't good at crossing the blood-brain barrier.
So it's not just about taking your pills, it's about getting those drugs to where they need to go.
And with the brain, it's not that easy. Remember how we said the blood-brain barrier is very selective?
Yeah, like a high-security nightclub with a very strict bouncer.
Exactly. Most ART drugs don't have the right look to get past that bouncer.
The article specifically talks about abacavir, right? A commonly used HIV medication.
Yeah, abacavir struggles to get into the brain. Its concentration in the brain is 5 to 10 times lower than in the blood.
Wow, so even if some abacavir manages to sneak in, it's not enough to really make a difference against those viral reservoirs, so what are we doing about it? I mean, this all sounds pretty bleak, right? Is there any hope?
Don't despair. There's a whole new field emerging that might hold the key to overcoming these challenges.
What is it?
Nanomedicine.
Nanomedicine, what's that?
Think tiny particles,
Yeah.
engineered to deliver drugs across the blood-brain barrier and directly to those viral reservoirs. It's like having a microscopic special forces team infiltrating the brain to deliver a targeted strike.
Okay, now that sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. We've got to dive deeper into that. But first, I think our listeners could use a little break to process all this.
I agree. It's a lot to take in. We've covered a lot of ground. But don't go anywhere. We'll be back soon to explore the exciting world of nanomedicine and what it could mean for the future of HIV treatment.
We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how some HIV medications, like abacavir, have a really tough time getting into the brain.
Yeah, it's like they hit a wall, literally.
That blood-brain barrier, right. So it's not enough just to take your meds. They have to be able to actually reach the virus hiding out in the brain.
Exactly. And that's where the design of those medications comes in.
What do you mean?
Well, for a drug to cross the blood-brain barrier, it needs to have certain characteristics. Remember we talked about lipophilicity?
Yeah, that was the, fat-loving thing.
Right. The more lipophilic a drug is, the better it is at dissolving in fats.
And why does that matter for the brain?
The blood-brain barrier is basically a wall of fatty molecules. So a drug that's lipophilic can kind of slip right through, like oil mixing with oil.
Ah, I see. So it's like if a drug is water-based, it's going to have a harder time getting through that oily barrier.
Precisely. And abacavir, unfortunately, is not very lipophilic, so it struggles to cross that barrier.
Okay, but what about those efflux pumps? Don't they play a role too?
Oh, absolutely. Those efflux pumps are like tiny bouncers at the border, constantly patrolling and kicking at anything that doesn't belong.
And they have abacavir on their list, right?
Yep. Abacavir triggers those pumps, so even if some of it does manage to cross the barrier, it gets pumped right back out.
Talk about a tough crowd. So even if a drug is lipophilic enough, it still has to avoid those efflux pumps to actually get into the brain?
Exactly. It's like a double whammy. And it highlights why designing drugs that can effectively target the brain is such a challenge.
So it sounds like many of our current HIV medications weren't really designed with the brain in mind.
That's true. They were primarily developed to control HIV in the bloodstream, which was and still is a major accomplishment.
Right. Back then, the focus was on stopping the virus from replicating and destroying the immune system.
Exactly. But now we know that HIV can infiltrate the brain and hide out there.
And cause all sorts of problems, right? We touched on hand earlier, those HIV-associated neurocognitive disorders.
Right. And these can be pretty debilitating.
Can you give us some examples? What does HAN actually look like for someone living with HIV?
Well, imagine struggling to remember simple things like appointments or what you did yesterday.
Or having trouble concentrating on a task or following a conversation.
Exactly. It can also affect things like motor skills, making it harder to move or coordinate your movements.
So it's not just about thinking and remembering. It can affect a person's whole life.
It can. And in some cases, HAND can lead to more serious problems, like dementia.
Dementia. So we're talking about potential memory loss, confusion, even personality changes.
Unfortunately, yes. And really highlights why we need to find ways to effectively treat HIV in the brain, not just in the rest of the body.
Absolutely. But here's where things get even trickier. The research also talks about how long-term use of some HIV medications might actually have negative consequences for the brain.
That's right. It's a bit of a paradox.
Wait, so the medications that are supposed to help could actually be causing harm?
It's a possibility, and it's something that researchers are actively studying.
So what kind of harm are we talking about?
Well, one concern is mitochondrial dysfunction.
Mitochondrial what now?
Mitochondria are like the powerhouses of our cells, responsible for producing energy.
Oh, right. I remember learning about those in biology class.
Well, some HIV medications might interfere with mitochondrial function, which could lead to a whole cascade of problems.
So it's like trying to fight one fire by starting another one?
In a way, yes. And it makes the search for new and better treatments even more urgent.
So we need medications that can effectively target HIV in the brain, but without causing additional damage.
Exactly. And that's where nanomedicine comes in.
All right, finally, let's talk about nanomedicine. I'm really curious to hear how this could be a game changer.
Imagine microscopic particles engineered to deliver drugs precisely where they're needed, even across the blood-brain barrier.
So these nanoparticles are like tiny delivery trucks carrying the medication directly to those viral reservoirs in the brain.
Exactly. And because we can design these nanoparticles at the molecular level, we can give them very specific properties.
Like what?
Well, we can control their size, shape, and even their surface properties. We can make them stealthy so they can evade the immune system.
Like those cloaking devices in Star Trek.
Kind of, yeah. And we can even make them target specific cells, like those infected with HIV.
So instead of flooding the whole body with medication, we can deliver it directly to the source of the problem.
Exactly. And that could make a huge difference, both in terms of effectiveness and in reducing side effects.
Okay, I'm getting really excited about this. Can you give us some specific examples of how this is being used for HIV treatment?
Sure. One approach involves coating nanoparticles with a polymer called PLGA.
PLGA. What's that?
It's a biodegradable material that's been used in medicine for a while. It's safe and effective, and it can help nanoparticles cross the blood-brain barrier.
So it's like a special coating that gives those tiny delivery trucks a VIP pass to the brain.
Exactly. And we can attach different molecules to PLGA, like those that bind specifically to HIV-infected cells.
So it's not just about getting the drug into the brain, it's about making sure it reaches the right cells.
Exactly. And the research is showing promising results with this approach. But PLGA-coated nanoparticles aren't the only game in town. There's also another exciting avenue using nanodiamonds.
Nanodiamonds, now that sounds really high-tech. What are those?
Nanodiamonds are tiny particles of carbon, and they're incredibly strong and stable. They can be engineered to carry a variety of drugs, and they've shown potential for delivering medications to the brain.
So they're like microscopic armored cars, transporting those precious drugs across the blood-brain barrier.
That's a great way to put it. And the research is showing promising results with nanodiamonds, too. They've been used to deliver efavirenz, another HIV medication, to the brain.
This is all incredibly exciting. But I have to ask, are there any downsides to using nanoparticles?
Well, like with any new technology, there are always potential risks.
Like what?
Well, one concern is toxicity. We need to make sure that these nanoparticles don't accumulate in the brain or other organs and cause damage.
So it's not just about getting the drug to the right place, it's also about making sure the delivery system itself is safe.
Exactly. And researchers are working hard to address these concerns. They're developing nanoparticles that break down naturally in the body after they've delivered their payload, and they're using materials that are known to be biocompatible and non-toxic.
So it sounds like there's a lot of careful consideration going into this research.
Absolutely. We're talking about manipulating matter at the nanoscale, which is incredibly powerful. We need to be very thoughtful about both the potential benefits and risks.
And beyond safety, I imagine there are practical challenges too, right? Like how do we actually manufacture these nanoparticles on a large scale and make them affordable for everyone who needs them?
Those are all important considerations. It's not enough to have a brilliant idea in the lab. We need to be able to translate that idea into a real-world solution.
So it's a long road from the lab to the clinic.
It is.
Yeah.
But the potential is there, and the progress is happening.
Well, it's definitely inspiring to hear about all this cutting-edge research. It feels like we're on the cusp of a major breakthrough in how we treat HIV, and not just in the brain, but throughout the body.
I agree. Nanomedicine holds incredible promise, not just for HIV, but for a wide range of diseases.
So we've gone from talking about the limitations of current HIV medications to exploring this whole new world of possibilities with nanomedicine.
It's a real shift in thinking, and it's really exciting to be a part of it.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier. You said that nanomedicine could have applications beyond HIV. Can you elaborate on that? What other diseases could potentially be treated with this technology?
Well, think about diseases that affect the brain, where getting drugs across that blood-brain barrier has always been a major obstacle.
Like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's?
Exactly. Those are prime candidates. Imagine being able to deliver drugs that can clear out those amyloid plaques in Alzheimer's, or protect brain cells from damage in Parkinson's.
It's like we're talking about a whole new toolkit for treating brain diseases.
We are. And it's not just about treating symptoms. Nanomedicine could potentially help us slow down or even reverse the progression of these diseases.
Now that would be truly revolutionary.
It would. And while there are still challenges to overcome, the progress being made in nanomedicine is giving us real hope for the future.
Well, I'm definitely leaving this deep dive feeling a lot more optimistic than when we started. It's amazing to see how science is constantly pushing boundaries and finding new ways to tackle these complex medical challenges.
It's inspiring, isn't it? And it's a reminder that we should never underestimate the power of human ingenuity.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners out there, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep believing in the power of science to change the world for the better.
We've only just scratched the surface of what's possible.
And we can't wait to see what the future holds. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey of discovery. Until next time, stay curious.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We left off talking about how nanomedicine could change everything for HIV treatment in the brain.
And not just for HIV. Nanomedicine is opening up a whole new frontier in how we treat a bunch of neurological conditions.
Right. It's like we've been using these blunt tools, and now we have something much more precise, like a scalpel instead of a hammer. That's a great way to put it. With nanomedicine, we can actually design these tiny particles, these nanoparticles, to have specific properties.
So it's not just about delivering a drug, it's about delivering it in a super targeted way.
Exactly. We can control their size, shape, even what they interact with in the body. We We can design them to bypass it.
The article mentioned coating nanoparticles with PLGA. I remember you said it was like a cloaking device.
It is. PLGA is a biodegradable polymer, so it breaks down naturally over time. We can attach other molecules to PLGA that act like homing beacons, guiding the nanoparticles to, say, HIV-infected cells.
So those nanoparticles aren't just wandering around, they're on a mission.
Exactly. And the research is showing some really promising results with this approach.
We also talked about nanodiamonds earlier. What was it about those?
Nanodiamonds are incredibly strong and stable. They can be engineered to carry a lot of different drugs. They're like these tiny, super durable delivery trucks.
And they've been used to deliver efavirenz to the brain, right? That's an HIV medication.
Yes. And the research is looking at using them for other drugs as well. Not just for HIV, but for things like brain tumors, stroke, you name it.
So we could potentially use nanodiamonds to deliver anti-cancer drugs directly to a tumor in the brain.
Exactly. Or neuroprotective agents to help protect brain cells after a stroke.
It's incredible to think about all the possibilities. But I have to ask, with something this new, are there any safety concerns? I mean, we're talking about injecting nanoparticles into the brain.
You're right to be cautious. Anytime you have a new technology, there are potential risks. But that's why researchers are studying this so carefully.
So what are some of the concerns?
One big one is toxicity.
Yeah.
We need to make sure these nanoparticles don't build up in the body and cause harm.
So it's not enough just to deliver the drug. The delivery system itself has to be safe.
Right. And scientists are working on that. They're designing nanoparticles that break down naturally after they've done their job. They're also using materials that are known to be biocompatible.
That's good to hear. It sounds like there's a lot of thought going into this research.
Absolutely. It's cutting-edge science, and it requires a lot of careful consideration.
I imagine there are other challenges too, beyond just the science, like how do you actually make these nanoparticles, and how do you make them affordable for everyone who needs them?
Those are all very real challenges. It's one thing to have a great idea in the lab. It's another to turn that idea into something that can actually help people in the real world.
So there's still a lot of work to do.
There is. But the progress that's been made is amazing. It really feels like we're on the verge of a revolution in medicine, especially for brain diseases.
It's inspiring, right? Thinking about how this could change people's lives.
It is. Imagine a future where HIV isn't this life-altering chronic condition, but something that can be effectively managed, even in the brain.
Not just HIV, but all those other brain diseases that have been so difficult to treat.
Exactly. Conditions like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even brain cancer. Nanomedicine could change the game for all of them.
It feels like we've gone from having almost no options to having a whole arsenal of new possibilities.
It's like we've finally found a way to crack the code of the brain.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the nitty-gritty of HIV and the blood-brain barrier to the incredible potential of nanomedicine.
It's been quite a journey.
And I hope our listeners have learned something new and maybe even feel a little bit more hopeful about the future.
I hope so too. It's an exciting time to be alive, especially if you're interested in science and medicine.
Absolutely. So to everyone listening out there, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep that spark of curiosity alive.
Because who knows what amazing discoveries are just around the corner.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world of science. Until then, stay curious.